Hi, I'm giving my video today on Jonathan Edwards' Charity and Its Fruits, Sermon 11, Undergoing Sufferings as a Duty to Christ. This has a focus on 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7, in which it says, Charity endures, hopes, believes, and bears all things. The emphasis here on this sermon is on the words bears all things. Like I said, uh, Edwards says it's the Christian's duty to undergo sufferings for Christ. This sermon style is the same as what James Cohen says in his journal review, Jonathan Edwards' sermon style. He focuses on a different sermon called The Future Punishment of the Wicked, Unavoidable, Intolerable, but the same prose applies here. It basically starts with presenting the text, giving a doctrinal statement, giving logical proofs, and then making it applicable to the hearers. So first, he presents the text. He tells them what they're going to talk about and lays out the scripture in front of them. Next, he gives a doctrinal statement. In this doctrinal statement, he says he's basically going to explain, I'm going to give you some proof of what I'm saying, and then I'm going to make it applicable to you. That's Edwards' own words, basically. So first, he says it's the Christian's duty not only to do for Christ, but to suffer for him. And then he builds on that by saying it's not only your duty to suffer, but to suffer all things. And he references a scripture reference in picking up a cross and following Jesus. This is obviously a reference to following him unto death. And that's the ultimate, not goal, but the ultimate showing that you have a spirit of Christ. He then goes on to his logical proofs. There are 9 of these he gives throughout the sermon. In these proofs, we really see Jonathan Edwards as a peerless wielder of logic. That's what George McDermott calls him in Jonathan Edwards, A City on a Hill and Redeemer Nation. And so, like I said, there are 9 of these. I'm going to start with the first 2 and then jump to the last 2 just to show you the progression of logic he uses. So the first one he uses, it says, if we don't have the Spirit, we're not true followers of Christ. He compares us to the bride of Christ, saying that we have to wholly give ourselves, willing to suffer anything with him and for him, because he has suffered for us. Secondly, this is probably the only fire and brimstone part. He says that we have to fear those who can kill the body and the soul, not just fear those who can kill the body. Therefore, sufferings, we should not fear the sufferings. And this kind of ties into his 8th point, where he says that true believers have overcome the world. Therefore, if we've overcome the world through Jesus, we have nothing left to fear. Sufferings cannot harm us because we've already overcome the adversities that are placed before us. And the last point is he explains these temptations. The points of all this suffering is to purify us, like he says in Peter, how this purifying process is as gold. Everything else is going to get burned away by the flame, but the pure gold is going to be what lasts until the end, and that's the same as the pure believer. The last point here is the application. He gives the chance to the hearer, to do a self-reflection on what he's been saying. He says, look at the apostles. Look at what the people I've been talking about. See the blessings that have been bestowed upon them and how happy they were. Look at Paul in prison preaching out joys to the Lord as his feet were in stocks. Next, he says, look to the joys and the glories of heaven ahead of you if you are going to be a sufferer with Christ, as is your duty. There are glories in heaven that just await you. Also, I'll give you people who have already gone before you. Look at Daniel, Jeremiah, Peter, Paul, Stephen. And so he ends with an exhortation, not really a warning here. And George Marsden gives us insight into the way Jonathan Edwards thought in his book, Jonathan Edwards, A Life. He says that Jonathan Edwards was talking about seeing God in everything, the stones, trees, bushes, but it's not a pantheistic view of God. He says he sees God because of his purity, his wisdom, and his love, and we really see that come out in this sermon.